I really thought that me framing my reviews around something actually interesting would last longer. Not that I don't have anything interesting to actually add to this, but the things that I thought about, like how we should question classics and how we shouldn't let nostalgia steer our reviews, and how, in general, we should not just trust an author blindly, are all things I want to save up for what will probably be my online execution by rabid book nerds. So, without further ado, because I don't have anything I want to frame around this is The Hobbit by J.R.R. Tolkien. The Hobbit is the story of a hobbit creature named Bilbo. Like most hobbits, he likes staying inside, drinking, eating, and enjoying life. Then one day a wizard dumps a bunch of dwarves on him and threatens him to go out on an adventure. Other than being promised riches, this sounds like my ideal life being ruined by family events again. I don't really have any smooth transitions or anything, so I'll just start by saying the characters are bad. Apart from Bilbo and Gollum, none of these characters have any personality, and that's me using the term character as loosely as I'll allow myself. Hadn't it been for Peter Jackson's adaptations of the book, I'd guess that you couldn't name a single other character that wasn't in The Lord of the Rings from memory. Just to prove to you how bad the dwarves are in this book, I want you to mention one dwarf that was not the main focus in Peter Jackson's adaptations. Not Feely, not Keely. I can't believe what he did there, but whatever. Not Balin, and not Thorin. You have 9 other characters to go for, so, just mention them. Most of them are either just in the background doing nothing but what the other dwarves are doing, or people with at most 2 traits going on at the same time. I find it hard to care about the dwarves, even when Feeling Keely dies in the Battle of the 5 Armies. Even if they are some of the few dwarves who have 2 traits balanced between themselves, which are being young and taking rash actions. Does that even out to 1 trait per dwarf, or I digress. The point is that I didn't care, even when Bilbo and Gollum, 2 of the best characters in the book, are fighting a battle of wits, because their best character in the story are bad characters in comparisons to what my basic expectation of stories are. A good character is someone who will react in any given situation. For instance, what would happen if Bilbo and Gollum were to join a punk band, or join a bake-off? Boy, I can only imagine that they'd stand around waiting for someone to tell them what to do. Whereas Samuel Vimes, he'll just find like an entire conspiracy, find a clever solution to all the duplicity that is going on, and arrest everyone while also coming over one of his personal prejudices and explaining why racism is bad and sexism is bad. Nah, that's boring. I'd rather watch 2 characters be pushed around. How exciting! Both of these characters are so closely tied to their story that if you pull them out of it and place them in any other setting, they'll be side characters at best. One has an obsession, the other needs to be pushed to be brave. Now we come back to the Dwarves War story, and, as I briefly mentioned before, how their characters are nothing other than 1 or 2 traits. My favorite example of how poorly written they are is Bofur. Yes, that is one of the dwarves. Don't feel too proud of yourself if you remember him from the book, cause he's just the bottom of every food-related joke and every joke about being fat. His entire personality is being fat.
Bamboo at your service.
That isn't entirely fair. I mean, all of these dwarves have more to their personality, kind of these racial agreements, like being greedy, complaining all the time, and some physical traits too, like crooked noses and long beards, and this book was written 2 years before World War II started. Yeah. If you haven't caught on yet, the dwarves throw an uncanny resemblance to anti-Semitic caricatures. I feel I should stress that anti-Semitic thought was incredibly normal in Europe before and during World War II, until people learned what happened in the concentration camps. And Tolkien's potential thoughts about Jews were extremely common at the time. If you disagree and think I'm reading too far into it, there's a link in the description to someone who argues this point much better than I ever could, and I highly recommend giving it a read. It was much more enjoyable than a lot of The Hobbit anyways, or at least informative.
Ouch.
I don't know if enjoyable is what the word I would use anyways. The question becomes, do we accept art despite its rather negative history, saying it was a different time, or do we hold it a bit accountable, at least, in that regard? And it all comes up to the individual. I say... no. A story doesn't become more comfortable just because you know it's from a different time that isn't as informed as today. Just like if your grandpa says something really racist, you don't go, oh well, he's from another time. Though you might say that, you might be thinking, I'm very uncomfortable right now. And by the way, if your grandparents or someone else use racial slurs in the family, just shut them down. I don't care if they're so old that you think they're gonna die soon. Let them die knowing they were wrong. What was I talking about again? Oh yeah. Anti-Semitism in a children's book that people keep on saying is brilliant, mostly because it was Tolkien who wrote it. Anyways, let's just get back to the dwarves. You might argue that writing 13 different personalities would have required too much effort, and while that is a foolish thing to say, let's pretend that it's valid that Tolkien didn't want to put effort into his work. Tolkien, the guy who wrote the Silmarillion. Okay, he has 13 dwarves, because that is an unlucky number for dwarves, but that doesn't have to be the case. Just lower the number to like 6, and you don't have that problem anymore. Oh, it's an unlucky number for dwarves to have 6 people in their company, and 7 is a lucky number. Where did Tolkien get 14 from? Which, by the way, yeah, he actually said that that is a lucky number for dwarves.
There are 13 of you. Very unlucky. Mr. Baggins will make it 14.
A splendid lucky number you found for us.
So why not just change it to an unlucky number for dwarves is 6 and lucky number for dwarves are 7, because that's relatable also. Speaking of the dwarves, they are useless in the story. Well, when Bilbo's around anyhow. When he is, they get into trouble and Bilbo has to save them every time, other than the times when Gandalf have to save them, but we'll get to Gandalf. When he isn't around, they do some stuff, but mostly just stand around being angry that they aren't rich yet. And speaking of Gandalf, he is a walking Deus Ex Machina. Fitting, as Deus means God and Gandalf is a demigod or demigod. He's divine. We'll leave it at that.
I am Gandalf, and Gandalf means me.
Anyways, Gandalf is more damaging to the story than he is in service of it. Take the scenes where the dwarves are about to get eaten by trolls and then get saved by Gandalf, distracting the trolls till the sun comes up and turns them into stone while Bilbo is hiding. Now, imagine this scene again, but this time have Bilbo distract the trolls until the sun comes up, followed by Gandalf coming along and helping set the dwarves free. You see, how a character solves situations shows how they have character. And it would show that Bilbo is far smarter and far more quick-witted than he assumes he is himself without making it, explicit, which is what every character here is, just one explicit traits or two. And distracting the trolls would make Bilbo's scene with Gollum and his scene with Smaug, where he riddles around. That's a new word now, riddles around.
Yeah.
It would
around town.
It would make that scene, as I was about to say, actually feel built up and worthwhile, not just something that Tolkien put in there because, that's fun, I guess. Anyways, I feel like there's one more thing I really want to talk about, but it's a spoiler. But on the other hand, I already said that feeling Killy died, so, who cares? It's a book from 1937. While the death of Smaug feels like a Deus Ex Machina, and it is, I feel like it illustrates a far bigger problem with The Hobbit. Smaug has been a force to be reckoned with since the moment we heard of him. The reason Erebor turned from a rich dwarven kingdom to a scorched grave. Smaug is a constant threat, often brought up and examined in the story, not just as a threat to them, but to the world. Then an old guy called Bard shoots Smaug with a bow and it attacks Lake Town and it dies. Now the humans and wood elves are the main antagonists to the dwarves, and Bilbo switches side before the goblins become the main antagonist to everyone again. Now, hot take here, but when you build up an enemy over the course of an entire story, it doesn't feel satisfactory to suddenly change who the final antagonist is. I get that Tolkien tried to say that dragons are the incarnation of greed and that humans must overcome it, sort of implying that Jewish people can't be human or can't overcome greed, but whatever. But that doesn't make changing the main antagonist around in the last act into a good idea. Sure, the story focuses on the goblins through the story since they were introduced, but they were not introduced until way later, way after Smaug. If Bard had been the main character, maybe I would have less of a problem with it, even though it kills the main antagonist, but this is the big problem with Tolkien. He wants to talk about this very specific thing. He wants to metaphorically tell people they have to be better, even if the story suffers for it. Because the only thing that really matters to Tolkien is that you get what his opinion is. Nuance be damned. Just, this main antagonist, he represents human greed. Therefore, we have to kill him with a human. The dwarves, who the story has been about, cannot be the final killers of Smaug because dwarves aren't human, even though they're built on stereotypes based on humans. See, that's the biggest problem. I think that's very reasonable to expect. And even if you look away from that, there's also the problems with the characters, the story, just problems everywhere. Things I've already brought up. But here's the weird thing. Despite all of these very real problems, I still kinda like it. First off, the narrator is a first-person storyteller who has a third-person's perspective on the story. While Narnia has the same, it only referred to the audience when it wanted to make sure you got the moral it was trying to force on you. But The Hobbit refers to you to talk about the story. This makes it feel more like a story being told to you, or if you're a parent, it opens up a dialogue with your child about the story, and that can train you into becoming a better reader for your children. Secondly, the book always takes time to describe things gently, which in turn makes everything feel safe. The scene with Gollum is about as intense as the scene with Smaug, which in turn is about as tense as the first chapter in the Hobbit hole. Normally I would have complained about this, but not here. Because when you combine these 2 points, it gives you a feeling of safety as someone is telling you a story. I do not have many good memories from my childhood, if you'll excuse my allegorical evidence, but one of them is being read to as a child, and despite having next to no memories about having The Hobbit read to me, I still feel that feeling again, even without having a connection. I will condemn nostalgia on the basis of giving a good review to anything, but The Hobbit evokes the feeling without relying on it. And The Hobbit has many flaws that is easier to overlook as a child. But its value for adults lay in experiencing something lost long ago. It's a perfect book to read out loud to your kids, for both your enjoyment and your children's. And personally, I think there are many flaws here, and your ability to forgive them will depend upon how much you enjoy being read to as a child, or your ability to view it as a cultural relic of pre-World War II children's literature exposing darker thoughts in the minds of the day. But that's just my opinion. Read whatever you want. Till next time. Andre.
Ah.
Prepare the beast.
Oh yeah! The great adventure is lighted up ahead. And Rand's gonna review the sequel and probably end up dead. Rest in peace, buddy.